A 1,000-mile stretch of silk-smooth road separated Casbeam, where to the best of my belief the Red Fiend had been scheduled to appear for the first time, and fateful Elphinstone, which we had reached about a week before Independence Day. The journey had taken up most of June, for we had seldom made more than 150 miles per travelling day, spending the rest of the time, up to 5 days in one case, at various stopping places, all of them also prearranged, no doubt. It was that stretch, then, along which the Fiend's spoor should be sought, and to this I devoted myself, after several unmentionable days of dashing up and down the relentlessly radiating roads in the vicinity of Elphinstone. Imagine me, reader, with my shyness, my distaste for any ostentation, my inherent sense of the comme il faut. Imagine me masking the frenzy of my grief with a trembling, ingratiating smile, while devising some casual pretext to flip through the hotel register. "Oh," I would say, "I'm almost positive that I stayed here once. Let me look up the entries for mid-June. Oh, no, I see I'm wrong after all. What a quaint name for a home town, Courtagain. Thanks very much." Or, "I had a customer staying here. I mislaid his address. May I—" And every once in a while, especially if the operator of the place happened to be a certain type of gloomy male, personal inspection of the books was denied me. I have a memo here. Between July 5th and November 18th, when I returned to Beardsley for a few days, I registered, if not actually stayed, at 342 hotels, motels and tourist homes. This figure includes a few registrations between Chestnut and Beardsley, one of which yielded a shadow of the Fiend, en Petit Larousse Île. I had to space and time my inquiries carefully, so as not to attract undue attention, and there must have been at least 50 places where I merely inquired at the desk, but that was a futile quest, and I preferred building up a foundation of verisimilitude and goodwill by first paying for an unneeded room. My survey showed that of the 300 or so books inspected, at least 20 provided me with a clue. The loitering Fiend had stopped even more often than we, or else, he was quite capable of that, he had thrown in additional registrations in order to keep me well furnished with derisive hints. Only in one case had he actually stayed at the same motor court as we, a few paces from Lolita's pillow. In some instances he had taken up quarters in the same or in a neighbouring block. Not infrequently he had lain in wait at an intermediate spot between two bespoken points. How vividly I recalled Lolita, just before our departure from Beardsley, prone on the parlour rug, studying tour books and maps and marking laps and stops with her lipstick. I discovered at once that he had foreseen my investigations and had planted insulting pseudonyms for my special benefit. At the very first motel office I visited, Ponderosa Lodge, his entry among a dozen obviously human ones read, "Dr. Graciana Forbson, Mirandola, New York." Its Italian comedy connotations could not fail to strike me, of course. The landlady deigned to inform me that the gentleman had been laid up for 5 days with a bad cold, and that he had left his car for repairs in some garage or other, and that he had checked out on the 4th of July. Yes, a girl called Anne Law had worked formerly at the lodge, and was now married to a grocer in Cedar City. One moonlit night I waylaid white-shoed Mary in a solitary street. An automaton, she was about to shriek, but I managed to humanize her by the simple act of falling on my knees and with pious yelps imploring her to help. She did not know a thing, she swore. Who was this Graciano Forbson? She seemed to waver. I whipped out $100 bill. She lifted it to the light of the moon. "He is your brother," she whispered at last. I plucked the bill out of her moon-cold hand and, spitting out a French curse, turned and ran away. This taught me to rely on myself alone. No detective could discover the clues Trapp had tuned to my mind and manner. I could not hope, of course, he would ever leave his correct name and address, but I did hope he might slip on the glaze of his own subtlety, by daring, say, to introduce a richer and more personal shot of colour than was strictly necessary, or by revealing too much through a qualitative sum of quantitative parts which revealed too little. In one thing he succeeded. He succeeded in thoroughly enmeshing me and my thrashing anguish in his demoniacal game. With infinite skill he swayed and staggered and regained an impossible balance, always leaving me with a sportive hope, if I may use such a term in speaking of betrayal, fury, desolation, horror, and hate, that he might give himself away next time. He never did, though coming damn close to it. We all admire the spangled acrobat with classical grace, meticulously walking his tight-rope in the talcum light. But how much rarer art there is in the sagging rope expert, wearing scarecrow clothes and impersonating a grotesque drunk. I should know. The clues he left did not establish his identity, but they reflected his personality, or at least a certain homogeneous and striking personality. His genre, his type of humour, at its best at least, the tone of his brain, had affinities with my own. He mimed and mocked me. His allusions were definitely highbrow. He was well-read. He knew French. He was versed in logodiddly and logomancy. He was an amateur of sex law. He had a feminine handwriting. He would change his name, but he could not disguise, no matter how he slanted them, his very peculiar T's, W's, and L's. Kelkapart Island was one of his favourite residences. He did not use a fountain pen, which fact, as any psychoanalyst will tell you, meant that the patient was a repressed undinist. One mercifully hopes there are water nymphs in the Styx.